The famed Plaza Hotel on the corner of 5th and 59th is one of only two hotels designated a National Historic Landmark in New York City. The Plaza's illustrious visitors include the Vanderbilts and the Beatles.
Perhaps the most famous resident of the Plaza is fictional, the heroine of the children's book, Eloise.
The Plaza Hotel on the corner of 5th and 59th is one of only two hotels designated a National Historic Landmark in New York. The famed Plaza Hotel on the corner of 5th and 59th is one of only two hotels designated a National Historic Landmark in New York City. The Plaza's illustrious visitors include the Vanderbilts and the Beatles.
Perhaps the most famous resident of the Plaza is fictional, the heroine of the children's book, Eloise. The idea of living in the Plaza like Eloise seemed a fantasy to Patty Farmer until she purchased a condo within the historic property and an idea began to take shape.
In this chapter bookmark, Maria Hall Brown talks with Patty about her newfound fascination with an entertaining part of the Plaza's history, the Persian Room.
You would think with a legacy property like the Plaza Hotel in New York City, each story surrounding the place would have already been told. When Patty Farmer moved into a renovated condo in the hotel, she found that assumption to be way off the mark.
I kept hearing about this Persian Room, this nightclub that used to be there many years ago. And through research, I found out it had been there for 4 decades. And I had never heard of it. A lot of people had never heard of it. And I wanted to know more about it. So I went to the management of the hotel and asked to look in their archives. And Maria, they looked at me like I had green hair. They said, "Archives? We have no archives." I know, the Plaza Hotel. And I thought that was shameful. I said, "You've been here 100 years. You have nothing. The Beatles were here. Marilyn Monroe was here." They said, "We have an odd picture or two, but no archives."
I want 2 tickets to the 7-Year Itch. A table for 2 at the Colony before the show, a table for 2 at the Persian Room after the show. Make it a corner table.
So a few phone calls later, a curiosity quest took on a whole new purpose. And the result? The Persian Room.
So I was lucky enough to be able to talk to some of the greats, Marge Champion, Andy Williams, Jack Jones, Patti Page, Lainey Kazan, and they put the heart into it.
One of my favorite stories has to be Carol Lawrence's story. For a number of reasons. First of all, just because of her performance, but also because of, the big event that happened to one of her, when she was performing, one of the people that was in the audience.
Cary Grant. The way they had it set up was prior to the show, the maitre d' would tell the entertainer who was in the audience. Because any given night, the celebrities weren't only on stage, it was always in the audience, kind of like Vegas in the old days. After people did their shows, they would go to the Persian Room and catch another show.
Right.
So the maitre d' told Carol, all the people that were in the audience and had to be recognized. And he was a Hungarian gentleman, and he said, "Oh, and, we're so lucky we have someone here, but you can't mention him. He can't be mentioned, Mr. Cary Grant, So Carol, did her opening bit, and then she got to the part, and she said, "Oh, Ethel Merman's here, and, this one's here, and that one's here." And she said she couldn't help herself. Finally, she said to the audience, she said, "We all know there's an elephant in the room, and I'm not supposed to mention him, but I have to mention him. Mr. Cary Grant, thank you so much for coming." And she said she saw at this little table back there, he stood up and he folded his napkin, put it down, and she thought she blew it. She thought he was getting ready to leave out that door that he was right by. But then he walked to the front, and the audience went crazy. They stood and clapped, and he went up to what was, the stage, although it was ground level, and she put on her best Fanny Bryce voice and said, "Oh, you're gorgeous," and he dipped her over and kissed her, and he said, "Right back at you."
A kiss worth sharing. The intimate setting of the Persian Room lasted until 1975, but Patty found that the stories live on quite vividly with those who grace the place with their talents.
You have been able to kind of garner and gather into your collection a lovely clutch of gals that talk about their experiences and are very frank and very forthright about how outrageous that period of time was.
Absolutely. You had Connie Stevens and Michelle Lee, and wonderful Lainey Kazan, Diane Carroll, carried over from the 50s into the 60s, and the 70s you had Rosalind Kind and Kay Ballard, and the 60s were crazy times. And Connie Stevens met Eddie Fisher at the Persian Room. Eloise was born in the Persian Room, so there was a lot going on. It was a crazy time.
Thanks for the memories. With this nostalgic chapter of Bookmark, I'm Maria Hall Brown.